What if the thing you were afraid of in the dark was not a monster? What if it was a neighbor? What if it was a friend? What if it wore the right face, used the right name, said all the right things, and the only way you could tell the difference was a pause, a fraction of a second too long, a smile that started in the mouth and stopped there? The town in this story exists. I have changed the names. I have changed certain identifying details. I have done this not to protect myself, but to protect the people who are still living there. The people who know what I know and have chosen to stay silent because silence, they have decided, is the only thing keeping them alive. This is the story of what lives in the hills and what it is willing to do to stay hidden. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. I love knowing who is in this with me. And if you have not subscribed to Neurofear HQ, do it right now. Hit that bell. Because once this story starts, you are going to want to be there for what comes next. 10 years is a long time to stay away from a place. Long enough that the memories begin to feel like they belong to a different person. Long enough that when you finally do return, you spend the first day with the unsettling sensation of being a tourist in your own past. This is what I told myself when I booked the trip back to Caldwell, which is not the real name of the town, but let's call it that. I told myself the strangeness I felt was normal, the product of distance and time, and the ordinary gap between who you were and who you have become. Caldwell sits inside the largest national forest in the state. It is one of those places that exists just outside the edge of what most people consider the world, too far from any city to be a suburb, too small to be a destination, too self-contained to ever fully belong to the century it technically occupies. The people who grow up there tend to either leave before 25 and never come back, or stay forever and never quite understand why anyone would want to leave. I had left. I had always meant to come back. 10 years had gone by before I did. The drive-in took me past the ranger station, past the seasonal campground that closed in October, past the 3 churches that had served the same 500 families for 4 generations. I passed the elementary school I had attended, which looked smaller than I remembered in the way that all childhood buildings do. I passed the gas station that had changed owners, but not its sign, which still advertised unleaded at a price from 12 years ago that nobody had ever updated. Everything was the same. This should have been comforting. It was not. My first evening back, I went to the bar. There was only one, and sat with people I'd grown up alongside. We talked about the things people talk about at reunions: jobs, relationships, who had left, who had stayed, who had surprised. Everyone. The conversation had a practiced quality, as though everyone had agreed beforehand on which topics were available and which were not. Nobody brought up the forest. Nobody brought up anything that happened after dark. I noticed, by the end of the evening, that nobody had mentioned Eli. Eli Marsh had been my best friend from the age of 9 until the day I left. We were the kind of friends who did not need to explain ourselves to each other. We had built a fort in his backyard from salvaged lumber and spent 2 summers sleeping in it. We had read the same books and argued about them and read them again. When his father left, I spent so many evenings at his house that his mother started setting a place for me automatically. I had not heard from Eli in over 3 years. The last message he sent me had been short and strange, a single sentence that I had read several times without finding a way to interpret it. It said, "I think I've been wrong about a lot of things. I'm going to try to fix it." I had written back. He had never responded. When I finally brought up his name to my host, a woman I had known since childhood named Petra, she set down her drink and looked at the table for a moment before answering. "Eli went into the woods about 10 days ago," she said. "He told people he needed some time alone. He took nothing with him, and he has not come back." The official search was announced the following morning at 6 o'clock. By 7 o'clock, I had signed my name to the volunteer list. This was Eli. The person who had taught me that loyalty was a practice, not a feeling. The person who had driven 4 hours to help me move my apartment when I could not afford movers, and who had refused any money and any thanks, with an irritability that meant he would have been embarrassed by either. I was not going to get back in my car and drive away. The search coordinator was a deputy from the county seat who introduced himself as Feld and who had the manner of someone who has run searches like this before and found, more often than not, that they do not end the way anyone hopes. He organized us into teams of 4, each led by a local deputy, and walked us through the basics of line search protocol with the brisk efficiency of someone who knows the first hour matters more than any of the others. The forest we were walking into was one I had explored extensively as a child. I knew its structure the way you know a house you grew up in. Not consciously, not as a map you could draw on paper, but in the body. In the automatic correction of your path when you are about to go wrong. The deputy assigned to lead my group was a man named Cutter, local-born who moved through the undergrowth with the ease of someone who had never been anywhere else. He was quiet and methodical, and I noticed he never looked directly at the other team members when he was not speaking to them. His gaze stayed on the forest. Assigned to walk beside me was a woman I recognized immediately, though she was not someone I had expected to see. Her name was Willa Soto. She had lived in Caldwell until our junior year of high school, when her family had moved away. Relocated, people said at the time, though nobody ever explained why a family would relocate in the middle of a school year, or why, when they did, they left most of their belongings behind. She looked at me with an expression that was part surprise and part something older and more guarded. "I didn't think you'd come back for this," she said. "He's my best friend," I said. "When did you get back to town?" "Last week," she said. And then she looked at the trees and said nothing more. We walked for 3 hours. We called Eli's name at regular intervals, and the forest returned each call in the particular way that large empty spaces do, swallowed and diminished, as if sound were something that did not survive long in there. We found nothing, no signs of passage, no equipment, no response. I spotted the first one about 40 minutes into the search. A figure standing off to the east, past the boundary of our search line, in the shadow of a pine stand so dense the light had given up trying to get through. She was young, late teens, perhaps 20, and she wore clothing that was wrong for the weather and wrong for the decade. A pale dress in the middle of October, no jacket, no pack. She was standing perfectly still, and she was watching our line with the focused, expressionless attention of something that does not need to pretend to belong. I blinked, and she was gone. I did not say anything. I kept walking. I kept calling Eli's name. But something had shifted in me. Some fundamental readiness that I was not aware I had been missing until it arrived. I began to pay attention in a different way, not to the search, to everything around the search. 3 hours in, during a water break, on a rocky outcrop above a shallow creek, Willa sat beside me and said very quietly, "You saw one." I looked at her. "The girl in the dress," she said. "I saw you see her." I asked her what she was. Willa was quiet for a long time. A crow landed in the hemlock above us, said its piece, and left. "My family left Caldwell when I was 16, Willa said, because my father saw his own face looking back at him from across the street. The same height, the same coat, walking the other direction. He watched it for 2 full minutes before it noticed him. And when it turned and looked, he said the expression it made was the expression of someone caught doing something they assumed would never be witnessed." She paused. "We were packed and on the highway within 24 hours. I'm back now because of Eli. He called me 3 weeks ago and told me he thought something was wrong in this town, that it had always been wrong, and he had finally figured out what. What did he think it was? He said he thought there were people living in these hills who were not people. Not originally. Things that had spent so long studying us, wearing our faces, living our lives, that they had become indistinguishable from us by any ordinary measure, and that some of them had been doing it so long they might not even remember what they were underneath. I thought about the figure in the dress. I thought about the expressionless attention with which it had watched us walk past. "And Eli?" I asked. "He said he'd found a way to tell the difference," she said. "He said he was going to try to fix things, and then he went into the forest and didn't come back. Deputy Cutter sent us back to the trailhead at 4 in the afternoon with instructions to return the following morning. Willa and I did not go back. We waited until the other volunteers had cleared the lot, then walked back into the trees. This decision was either very brave or very stupid, and I am still not entirely sure which. Willa knew where she was going. She had been in contact with Eli, she explained, for several weeks before his disappearance, and in those conversations, he had described a specific location in the forest that he believed was significant. Not a cave system he had found on any official map, a place he had been shown years earlier by someone he thought was a friend. We walked for nearly an hour, off trail the entire time, descending toward the low ground along the creek. The light was going fast. In a deep forest in October, darkness comes earlier than you think it should, as if the trees are drawing it down from above. We moved as quickly as we could without moving carelessly. The place Eli had described was a cluster of limestone formations at the base of a long slope where groundwater seeped continuously from a crack in the bedrock and ran in a thin, clear sheet down to the creek below. The rock surface was covered in a pale gray-green lichen that made it look almost luminous in the fading light. And carved into the surface above the seam of water, figures, small, stylized, their arms raised, their fingers too long, some of them ancient, the stone around the carvings worn smooth by decades of weather. Others recent enough that the edges were still sharp. Between two of the largest limestone slabs was an opening. Not large, you would have to turn sideways and duck your head, but undeniable. A way down. The cold air rising from it carried that smell, mineral and wet and very old, like the exhalation of something that has been breathing underground for a very long time. "We are not going in there," I said. "No," Willa agreed. "We are not." But we did not leave immediately because we could hear something. From within the opening, barely audible, a sound that resolved, as I held my breath and made myself be still, into a voice. More than one voice, speaking in a low, even cadence that was almost but not quite in any language I recognized. And beneath the voices, another sound. Something rhythmic and irregular. Knocking. Something was knocking on the underside of the stone from below. Willa grabbed my arm and we moved. Not running, because running draws attention and makes noise, but moving at the absolute limit of what quiet movement allows. We went up the slope, away from the creek, angling northeast toward the main trail. I did not look back. I focused on my footing and on the placement of each step and on the simple mechanical act of getting higher and faster. Behind us, the sound of the voices stopped. And then something else started. A sound I cannot fully describe. Something between a footstep and not a footstep. As if something were moving through the leaf litter by a method that was adjacent to walking but not identical to it, covering ground more quickly than the sounds it made should have allowed. We reached the main trail at a sprint and did not stop until we hit the gravel of the parking lot. Eli Marsh was found the next morning. He was discovered by a different search team about a mile south of where Willa and I had been the evening before. He was in poor physical condition, dehydrated, hypothermic, with injuries consistent with a fall. He was transported to the same county hospital and admitted for observation. His mother was called. The community page filled up with relieved posts and heart emojis again. Willa and I drove to the hospital together. We did not speak on the way. I think we both already knew what we were going to find and were using the silence to prepare for it. The person in the hospital bed had Eli's face. It had his particular way of sitting, slightly forward, elbows on knees. And when it looked up as we entered the room, it made exactly the right expression of relief at seeing familiar people. But it called me by a nickname Eli had stopped using when we were 14. A nickname that had been superseded so completely by our actual names that I had not heard it in over 15 years. And when I said nothing, when I simply looked at it, it held the expression a fraction of a second too long before recalibrating. A fraction, that is all. That is what separates them from us in the end. Not appearance, not vocabulary, not memory. Timing. The infinitesimal miscalibration of something that has learned to perform emotion rather than feel it. I smiled. I said I was glad it was safe. I said I was leaving in the morning. I did not look at Willa directly. I squeezed the thing's hand once. Cool, very slightly the wrong texture. And I walked out. In the hallway, I kept walking. Past the nurse's station, past the waiting area, out through the automatic doors and into the parking lot. Willa fell into step beside me. How many do you think there are? I asked. In the town? I don't know. Some of them have been there for years. Decades, maybe. There was a family, the Harvers, who moved to Caldwell in 1983. People who remember them say they were always slightly off. Friendly, but not quite, right? They had a daughter who grew up and married a local man and had children, and those children grew up, and now... She stopped. Now? I said. Now I don't know which of the people in this town are their descendants and which of them are something else entirely. We reached my car. I stood with my keys in my hand and the hospital entrance behind me in the forest, 2 miles away, visible as a dark line above the rooftops of the town. What happened to Eli? I asked. The real Eli. Willa looked at the forest. I think he went in to find them. I think he thought he could expose them somehow, document them, prove what was happening. And they caught him. Yes. He's still down there. Yes. I thought about the knocking sound we had heard from beneath the limestone. Rhythmic, deliberate, like someone who knew they could not be heard but needed to try anyway, because the alternative was to stop trying, and stopping felt like a different kind of death. That night, back at Petra's house, something happened that pushed my departure forward by approximately 12 hours. I had gone to bed early, genuinely exhausted in the way that fear exhausts you. Not just physically, but at some deeper level, as if your nervous system has been running a program in the background that it was not designed to sustain. I was asleep within minutes. I woke at some point in the middle of the night. The room was very dark and very quiet. The house was making none of the ordinary sounds that houses make. No settling, no hum of appliances, no distant traffic. Just silence, absolute and total. Something was outside the window. I did not see it move. I did not hear it. I simply became aware, with the particular certainty of someone whose survival instincts have recently been calibrated by experience, that something on the other side of that glass was paying very close attention to me. I did not go to the window. I lay very still and I breathed very slowly, and I made the calculation that the best thing I could do was appear to still be asleep. After a while, I couldn't tell you how long, because time behaves strangely when your entire body is dedicated to the project of not reacting. The quality of the silence changed. Whatever had been outside moved away. I got up, dressed in the dark, moved through the house without turning on any lights, and sat in my car in the driveway until dawn. I left Caldwell at first light. I drove 4 hours without stopping, without music, without podcasts. I drove in a silence that felt earned. In the months since, I have done a great deal of reading. I have found accounts of similar phenomena in places across the country and beyond. Pockets of forest or wilderness where the same cluster of experiences has been reported across generations. People who came back from the woods changed in ways they could not articulate. Family members who were right, but not quite right. Underground sounds, figures that should not have been there. The specific, low-frequency wrongness of something ancient and patient, wearing a face it borrowed, and has had long enough to make feel like its own. These accounts go back a very long time. Hundreds of years in some places, thousands in others. Whatever they are, and whatever name you want to put on them, they have been here since long before we built towns on top of their territory. They have watched every generation. They have learned from every generation. And in at least some cases, they have become so integrated into the communities around them that the line between what was original and what was replacement has become impossible to draw. Which raises the question, and I say this not to frighten you, but because I think it is the honest thing to say, which raises the question of how you would know if they had been in your town long enough, if they had been careful enough, if you had never had a reason to pay the specific, precise, uncomfortably close kind of attention. How would any of us know? I have not been back to Caldwell. Willa sends me occasional brief messages, enough to let me know she is still there, still watching, still safe. She has said more than once that she believes some of the ones living in that town have been there so long they no longer know what they were before, that they have inhabited the borrowed lives so completely that the original purpose has faded into something like instinct. I find that almost more disturbing than the alternative. The idea that the thing watching me from outside that window was not malevolent, just curious, just doing what it has always done, just living the only life it can still remember, knowing how to live. The real Eli Marsh is underground in a national forest. I believe he is alive because they need him to be. I believe he is in the dark, in the cold, listening to his own voice on the surface above him, going through the motions of his life. I believe he is still trying to leave knock. And sometimes, this is the part I find hardest to say, and sometimes I think about going back, about finding that opening in the limestone and going down, about following the sound of the knocking to wherever it leads. I have not done it, not yet, but I keep the thought close. Because Eli would have done it for me. He already tried. If this one got under your skin, if you found yourself checking the window just once while it was playing, you are not alone. That is the correct response. That means you are paying attention. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. I read every single one. And if Neurofear HQ is where you want to be when you are looking for stories that go to the real edge, subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell and join the community that does not look away. These stories are out there. The people who lived them need someone willing to listen. We will be back with more. Until then, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and if something seems not quite right, trust that it usually is.